but also a super important stretch. This is, I grew up in Indianapolis, and boy, those last 5 laps at the Indy 500 are super important, and that's kind of where we are now. It doesn't mean anything if you led for 195 laps. It's you gotta be in the lead on that last one. So so now here is where you're gonna have the handoff. We're gonna the goal. Going to give you already the goals of the conversation here are going to be you need to get consent from the kids to enter into that confidential candor conversation pursuant to Iowa law. Okay? We did that. Anybody have any questions about that? Let's start with that right away. You guys weren't at the last workshop? Right. So anybody want to explain who was here for the last one? Dar, I'll let you do that because you're such an amazing communicator. Can you share with her a little bit about what this is, though? Because this is a critical piece of doing these workshops in Iowa. Can you explain a little bit to them about this whole notion of getting consent?
Don't I wish I knew? So actually the Candor law in Iowa really lays out very nicely an informed consent for the patients or their family members really to sign that allows you as an organization to divulge all of the information that you've collected on B as it relates to the investigation of what occurred. It also then protects a portion of the information that you collected only as a result of your investigation from ever going to court through a litigation.
Or being told to anybody.
Yeah, or being told to anybody. It keeps it
it makes it is a really important thing that, and it allows for this amazingly candid conversation to happen, but with the notion that as I share all this with happen, the facts are the facts, and they're always going to be able to have the facts. They're going to have the medical record, they have all that. But the summary that you've made of it, the conclusions you've made of it, all that sort of stuff has to stay within that room, and it can't go outside of that. So, but you got to get their consent first in writing before you can then have the conversation. So the goal is and they're going to be up here and they're going to be with their lawyer who wouldn't be here if they weren't interested, is to again, as Bruce says, all of these need to be done as empathically as possible for doing that. So that is it. And again, they're going to want the big 4 up there, right? They're going to want the truthful, accurate information, now that you know what it is. They're going to want the support. They're going to want the apology. And here is where it gets to the heart of what Carol shared, which is they're going to want follow-up. They're going to want to know you're committed to preventing in the future, what you're going to do as it is related to that. And you want to begin to get into that conversation about, there's this thing, it's hard to talk about. It's a little difficult, but the money part. That we want to share with you. We want to begin those conversations to see if we can come up with a way to reach some sort of financial compensation as well doing that. So it's bringing all these things together, and again, very specific to the Candor legislation that's there. So these are the questions. The goals, again, are to meet with the family and do the big 3. Tell them what you know. Share with them what you're doing to prevent it in the future, and begin to have that conversation. But it's got to start with getting the consent. So you'll have whoever volunteers will give you maybe a binder with a blank sheet of paper, but it will be, in reality, imagine it's the consent form you just want them to sign to kind of work our way through that. Any questions related to the setup? Marty?
Is it going to be a team of people from the hospital talking to the patient and their lawyer, or a single person? I mean, each group, and I would even have like you two can join this group over here and kind of talk together. I have seen this work best like it did at the last workshop, which is somebody who understands the clinical piece and somebody else who understands kind of the risk or legal or other piece to begin to have that conversation. So somebody's handling the clinical piece. The other person is the one that may lead into about the financial part. All right, so why don't you guys, again, take some time, look at these questions, think about who in your organization might go up to do that, and then I'll do what I usually do, which is to send Bruce around to see if he can find volunteers.
This table here.
We're still looking for a volunteer. We ran around to tables, but now we want to bring the pressure of the group on to, we need a volunteer. Is there one or two people that wants to do this resolution conversation? To take advantage of the opportunity, the rare opportunity to learn by doing.
And it's the last in our series, so.
It is, this is it. This is it. There's no fifth training. This is it. Tim, how would you like to do it with me? Would you like to see me and Tim do it? Yes. All right, we'll give it a try. Let me get a drink of water.
So don't turn my mic on yet. We got to talk about this.
Okay, we're going to huddle for just 1 second.
Okay.
Can I just remember everyone's names? It's
Jeffrey.
and Susan and their lawyer,
Stevens.
Martin.
And the patient's name is Thomas, right?
Yeah,
The patient's name is Thomas Stevens.
Jeffrey and
That's
Susan.
their dad,
Okay.
and Jeffrey and Susan. Bruce, what role are you going to play?
My name is Bruce Lambert from Northwestern University. In real life, I'm a college professor and a communication skills trainer. And in this scenario, I am going to play the risk manager.
And I'm Tim McDonald, and I'm going to play the role of the Chief Medical Officer who's overseeing the process improvements and the other work related to them. I've had multiple conversations with the family kind of updating them, but we haven't really sat down and talked about all of what we learned and the rest of it. And you know, I think you know me.
And this is our time frame is months
6
after
months,
the event.
6 or 8 months
after the event.
after the event.
So I will assume they are acquainted with me as well as with them, having had some previous conversations. So if you're ready, we'll begin.
Yeah, let's go ahead.
Hi, it's Bruce Lambert. It's good to see you again.
Martin,
Your
it's
name
good to see you again.
is,
Thanks for coming and representing the family. My
Susan
pleasure.
and
Great.
Good to see you again.
Yeah, it's good to
Hi,
see you.
Susan.
Hi.
And how are you?
Good.
You are
I'm sorry, I'm blanking right now on my own name.
Thomas.
Jeffrey.
Jeffrey.
Okay,
Yeah.
Jeffrey. And Bruce Lambert. Good to see you, Mark.
So, Jeffrey, how are you?
Jeffrey.
Can I get you a glass of water? 'Cause
No,
it's
I'm
been
okay.
hot. It's been
Okay,
it's
just
been
a
really
little frazzled last time we were in this room.
Sure,
It did not go so well.
Yeah.
So can we have a seat?
Yes, please, thank you.
Great.
Good.
Well,
First, Tim, I just want to say that we appreciate your continuing to meet with us over this. My clients and I have talked a little bit today, and they've expressed to me how appreciative they've been of the process that you've taken them through of meeting with them, keeping them informed. It's been a really horrifying and disruptive experience for them, as you know, and so we're eager to hear what you have to tell us today, what you have to offer, any requests you have of them. I want to stay out of the conversation as much as possible, but we may have some offers and requests from you too, depending on what you say.
Thank you, Martin.
Thank you, Martin.
We're glad you're here. Our hope is that you'll be able to make sure that everything we talk about is meeting their questions that they have, as well as being fair as the best way to kind of move forward doing this. But first, I'd like to ask, how's your dad doing? I know it's been 8 months since the fall, and we were able to finally drain the burr hole and the burn. I was just wondering how your dad's doing, and how are you guys doing? Because I agree, it was horrible what you had to go through.
Thank you. It's been hard. He's hanging in there. He's doing really well. Comparatively, his spirits are up. Obviously, so there's a lot of, he doesn't really remember the incident exactly. Things are a little bit fuzzy for him. Obviously, he knows that, burns healing and all that. But yeah, it's been a stressful time for our family. I think we all knew that he was going to have these procedures and that he's declining a bit in his health, but that was a pretty unexpected blow. So it's just taken us a lot of time to kind of figure out, the new normal and taking care of him, but we're hanging in there. Thank you.
How about you, Jeffrey? How are you doing? How's your dad?
It's hard to see, honestly. It's just a reminder every time we look at him, and I can't help but wonder if there's anything that happened that has affected him in a way that maybe isn't just on his skin, but that's been kind of difficult, and just the burden that we feel now taking care of him, it's literally nothing that we thought would happen. One of the last things you expect to hear when your family member is brought into a procedure is that there's been a fire. So I'm still kind of letting that settle, and honestly, I'm mad.
The whole thing is so unexpected and so unusual, and it sounds like you guys are still coming to grips with what it might have done to your dad, and because of his condition, he may not even be able to completely communicate how it's affected him. It sounds like that's really on your mind, and you're angry. You're angry with us about how things turned out.
I'm angry, and I do want someone to say this is your fault. This is you, and I want someone to be held accountable for this, because he didn't do anything.
So Jeffrey, that's one of the reasons we're meeting today. And if there's one thing we know for sure, is that your dad did absolutely nothing, right? This was absolutely not his fault. He had no culpability in this at all. This was something that we did that ended up harming your dad. So if you'll allow me, I'll try to say what this meeting is, what we're hoping to accomplish with this meeting, and then we can go on and have a conversation. So we've done a complete investigation now of what happened with your dad. We have a very full understanding of what happened and why it happened, and we've actually begun to take some steps so it doesn't ever happen again to anyone else. We also have some ideas to share with you about how we might be able to remedy the situation. And we feel that we owe you not just an apology, but some form of compensation to make you whole for the harm that we've done to you. And so part of the purpose of this conversation today is to begin that conversation. We have some ideas about what might be fair compensation to you and your family, but we also want to hear from you. Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah, I'd love to hear what you have to say about it. Absolutely.
And it sounds like, listening to you, Jeffrey, that you have feelings of really wanting to identify the person or persons who really we need to hold accountable. Is that sounded like that was? Is that did I read that right?
To have to go through something like this
Sure.
again, and I mean I know there's things that come up, but to not be able to really explain to him and to our family what exactly happened has been really hard. So just to get more information and to be able to move forward with knowing what happened instead of this question.
Yeah.
Yeah, and God forbid it happens to anyone else, you know. I mean, I don't think anybody ever expects something like this to happen, and it makes you gun shy. I mean, even me going to the hospital now for anything, taking a family member to the hospital is still a little bit traumatic because you just never think something like that's going to happen.
So you're feeling that medical care might not be safe even for you. This situation has scared you off of all kinds of, it's understandable.
Yeah.
And let me just say, talking to them, it's not just the people. I mean, I think Jeffrey does really want to know what's going to happen to the people that were involved, but we all also want to know really what your hospital is going to do to protect future patients, right?
Yeah.
And not just at your hospital, but you know, this could happen at other hospitals. What are you going to do to prevent this from happening as much as you can? That would be meaningful to my clients.
I think we have some answers. We'll see whether they're satisfactory to you, and you'll let us know. But at least we have the beginning of some answers to that. But before we get into that, because we're here in the state of Iowa, there's some formalities we'd like to take care of with you before we talk about all that we've learned. And I'm going to let Tim talk to you a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and bring Martin in on this. He's aware of this. There's a this process in Iowa. It's called the Candor legislation, and what it does is it creates a space for us to share with you all of the information, everything we have. And that is our goal today, to share everything with you of what we've learned, what our plans are going forward, and the rest of it. But the goal is to be able to do this in a safe space where you can share everything you're thinking with us. Absolutely everything you're thinking. We share everything with you, but everything then stays in this space, that this is where it is, and that we would like you to sign the consent that allows this process to go forward. The reason you need to sign a consent is that the law requires everything we talk about stays strictly confidential within this conversation. It's not to say the facts can't come out and you can't use that, because the facts are the facts and you'll be able to talk about those. But what we actually say, what you say to us, and what we say to you with signing this consent keeps it all confidential. And I know, Martin, you and I've talked about it. Is there anything else about this consent that you might be helpful for you to share with Jeffrey and Susan?
Well, we actually have talked about this, and what we appreciated was the way in which you've demonstrated the spirit of this law by just being open and honest from the very beginning with Jeffrey and Susan. So I know there's a part of the law that says you're supposed to get that consent early on, but that was just not in the cards here. This was all happening so fast. So I appreciated your leap of faith, frankly, into this discussion. And I think you have a clear understanding that anything that's been shared in these conversations can't be used in a court of law were you ever to litigate, which is not to say that you couldn't prove it. I mean, we know the facts better than we would have if they hadn't talked to us. So I think it is a fair process, and I think this hospital's behaved honorably. I think that's what you think.
Yeah.
I guess I'm just a little confused about it. Sometimes when I think about it, it feels like you're just trying to cover your ass, to be honest, and that you're worried about us suing you. And that's what this is that you can't say that because you signed this thing. That's what I'm worried about.
That we might be trying to protect ourselves from you.
Honestly.
What would reassure you that we had other motivations other than that?
I'm not sure, honestly. I think I just needed to say that.
Well, and it's understandable that you'd feel that way. When I first was involved in looking at the whole legislation, this consent, I kind of felt the same way. But it seems it does allow this forum, and as your attorney has shared with you, the facts are the facts. We're not protecting ourselves from the facts not getting out, because the facts are going to be there. Yeah. This is just a way to try to create a process to have this conversation and see if we can't move forward. And as Bruce mentioned, look at potential remedies and improvement in a way where we can actually avoid a lawsuit. I won't kid you. We absolutely would love to avoid a lawsuit.
I think that's
yeah.
what
So
we want.
so to that end, I mean, that is one of our motivations. But that's why we want your lawyer to be here to make sure that this process is fair, and that we do what you said, which is we want to show that we are holding ourselves accountable. And this is one way to do that. And there are individuals, particularly in the leadership of the hospital, who I am representing them to say they do feel responsible and accountable. They own this. As Bruce mentioned, your father has no culpability in this whatsoever. We want to share that accountability with you and what we're doing.
And we hope to demonstrate in part of what we're going to talk about with you today, our intention to try and make you whole. We know that we can't turn back the clock, and no amount of money or improvement in the way we do things is going to make those burns go away or take away the shock of the news on that day when we had to tell you there was a fire in the operating room. We're so sorry that all of that happened and that we put you through that. There's no question that we let you down in those circumstances, and we're trying our best to do the right thing by you and your family now. In Iowa, this is the legal process that we go through. You have alternatives, so you don't have to sign. If you think it would be better for your family not to sign, you can follow that process.
I appreciate it. That's clear to me about why, and I appreciate that. I think,
Yeah. Well, and you guys have not been resistant to us bringing our lawyer, which I think makes us feel, and have in fact been encouraging of it, which I do. It makes me feel much more comfortable about it.
Jeffrey, Susan, is there anything that you think they've held back? Is that part of, is there any distrust about whether they've told you everything they know? Is that what's behind your concern about the consent form?
I think I'm just curious about it, if you do know anything else too in this conversation, and what that is, and it's, yeah.
Well, we do have that, and like it was before, it was very uncomfortable for us to learn how this happened because we made a lot of mistakes, and I know it's going to be very hard for you to hear this too. It's going to be very unsettling for you to hear what we've learned. We're not proud of it. We're embarrassed by what happened. But I think, as Bruce said, we understand it really well, so we have this commitment to, I think, fix it. But we're so sorry to have to go through this, to have to explain all this stuff to you, knowing, even though we've had a lot of conversations with you, some of the stuff we've learned that you may not know yet, it may be really hard for you to hear.
So let's table the consent signing for a moment while you explain to us, what it is that you've done, what you've changed, and then we'll come back to the consent signing piece. But what's changed, and how have you handled the personnel involved in this? What changes are you going to make that are going to protect future patients like Mr. Stevens?
Well, I think on the personnel side, I think the most accountable person in the organization would be me. I am the chief medical officer. I am responsible for the safety of our patients. I let you down. If anybody should be fired in the organization, it should be me. Because so many of these things were things that we oversee that shouldn't have happened. And so the individuals who work for us, we put them in the position to fail. And so that's my best answer that I have for you on the accountability piece. And I fully understand if you continue to be angry with us, with me, and with others, but I would like to have the opportunity to share with them, Martin, what happened. And it's with that, then I think it only makes sense to talk about what we're going to do to improve. And then at the end, I'm going to have an ask of you. I'd really like you to participate in helping us be safer. And I just have some ideas about that I want to share with you, but
Jeffrey,
I'm going to go at your
Susan,
pace.
I can see you both holding back tears. Is it painful just to hear us
It's just
refer
nice
to it
to hear
again.
someone
It's
accept
relieving,
responsibility.
honestly. I think that's what we've been waiting for.
It means
no
a lot.
one's said that.
It means a lot to hear you take responsibility.
Thank you.
Okay.
Why don't we have them sign the consent real
Yeah.
quickly? I apologize for this formality. We would rather just have the conversation. If you just sign that real quickly, then we could go on and begin to have the rest of our conversation.
Do I give it to you?
So, in many ways, some of what we have to tell you won't be news and won't be surprising. Your dad had fallen, came into the operating room to have a small hole drilled in his head to relieve the pressure from the bleeding. And during that procedure, there was a fire in the operating room, and your dad was burned. So these are the basic facts, which you already know. We now know what caused the fire, and it was our fault. It was a series of mistakes that we made that led to this fire in the operating room. In principle, it was avoidable. A variety of circumstances came together on that day to lead it to happen. I'm going to ask Tim to describe some of the details so you guys can have as complete an understanding as we have of exactly what happened that day.
I know early on Dr. David had a chance to talk to you a little bit about, and the phrase he may have used is kind of the fire triangle. And to start a fire, you need the three things. You need oxygen, you need something to burn, and you need a spark to start it. Most of the time in the operating room, we always have the spark that's there. That's the electrocautery he described that stops the bleeding when we make an incision. In a case like this, the way the oxygen is usually delivered is through a breathing tube in an anesthesia machine. So there's no extra oxygen anywhere around your dad's face. It's all just going in and out. And in this case, because of his bad heart, the anesthesiologist felt it was too dangerous to do general anesthesia, so gave him some medicine through the IV to make him comfortable. And he then decided to give him extra oxygen through the nose just to be super safe. And I know this is going to be really hard, part of it, and it's, again, very disappointing for us. The anesthesiologist and the surgeon never talked about the fact that your dad was getting that extra oxygen. That was one of the first big mistakes. The next part is to prevent infections after surgery. We use this liquid to clean the skin, and the liquid we've been using the last couple of years has alcohol in it, and it's really good at killing germs. But unfortunately, it also can serve as a fuel for a fire. And again, as unbelievable as this may sound, through a bunch of things we discovered, the surgeon used, the team used 10 times as much of that solution as they should have, which normally wouldn't create a problem, but with the oxygen and then the spark, it was all that alcohol that caused that fire to start. Nobody talked to each other. Even though we have a checklist to make sure everything is safe, it doesn't include, is there a risk of fire? That's the piece that we think there's going to be a lot of learning that we can share with every hospital around the world about this, because this kind of fire we discovered, we didn't know it before your dad, has actually happened many times since then. Not in our hospital, but other places. Let me just stop there, and it's a lot to share, Martin. It's a lot to share. I just want to stop there. But those are all the things that came together that that's how the fire started, because I know that's one of the things you wanted to know. And there's other things I can share, but I want to stop there and see.
I'm glad to know. I thank you for explaining it. I'm really glad we know. What makes me angry about that is you telling us that's happened to other places, and that it wasn't something that was even like on this hospital's radar. So that's the most, if you told me this first time that ever happened anywhere, I mean, that would be a different story. But I would like to know, I mean, moving forward, I'm just glad he's okay, and we got out pretty lucky, I think, considering. But I don't want this to happen to other people, so I want to talk about.
You're angry that we failed to protect your dad. Maybe we should have known about this risk because it had happened to other people.
Yeah, and I'm angry at whatever other hospital this happened at, that they didn't tell people.
Yeah, it's extremely frustrating for us. I can only imagine how frustrating and maddening it must be for you when we hear that things that have harmed patients in our hospital have actually happened elsewhere, and we failed to take steps that would have stopped it from happening. It's just so frustrating.
Yeah.
I know this is.
You've talked a lot about learning, so I think we'd like to hear, how you're going to take this experience and learn from it, not only at your organization, but how you're going to advance it. Maybe that's what you were getting at when asking for their help.
That's right, Martin, and again, thank you for sharing your frustration, because we can't get better until we learn more, from you. But one option that we'd like to make it an option for you to think about, and you don't have to decide today, but I would love it if you could serve as the spokespeople for this kind of problem, because I think you'd be far better at communicating to all the hospitals that we could find a way to reach out to why this is so important. Because I can talk about fire in the OR as much as I want, but I've never had my father, I've never had a family member, I've never had a loved one suffer from a burn in the operating room, and I've never had to take care of them like you have. I think you're very articulate people. You've stuck with us throughout here despite rightfully being angry at this. I'd like you to think about being part of a communication strategy to get to the issue you just mentioned. Because I think you are the best potential people to do that, way better than Bruce or myself.
So why don't you just take time to think? That's not something where we need an answer today. We just want you to know that we thought that might be an opportunity you might be interested in, where we could try to make the best out of this situation so that your father's suffering wouldn't be in vain, but we might be able to use as an opportunity to make good for other people. But it's not something where we need you to answer now. So take some time and think about it.
It is something that is so important to us, and what we've been talking about is we don't want anyone to go through this, or what are the things that we can do to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And so we'll talk about it, but I think that is definitely something that we would be interested in.
So, because there's another option, just to think about, that goes back to something I haven't shared yet, which again is a defect, a mistake on our part, and that is that, and a lot of us assumed that there was a lot of teaching and training of the people in the operating room about how to use this new, what we call PrEP solution, infection prevention solution, a couple of years ago when it came into our hospital. And what we discovered was there wasn't any. There was a rep who was bringing the applicators in that have this solution, and we never did the proper training. So an even more fundamental opportunity would be for you to have that chance to meet with all of our OR personnel and say, hey, this is why this is so important.
It is hard to hear about all the steps that have gone wrong that led to this, that could have been prevented. And I don't know, it's just it's hard as they keep coming out.
Yeah.
Because it seems like we made so many mistakes.
It's just like a perfect storm for this to happen.
I mean, I wish I could hold everybody accountable. I wish I could find that rep and just,
But we appreciate the offer.
Yes,
I mean,
we
because
do.
your offer to engage them to the extent that you want to be engaged, I think is a sincere one. It sounds sincere to me, and I know it's something that we've talked about as well. So let's consider that. And it sounds like the potential is here to actually
make a real difference.
Yeah.
And I think that would be important too.
We hope so. I wanted to say one other thing to Jeffrey and Susan is that we've done this elaborate investigation to try to find out what went wrong, and we found, to our dismay, many things that went wrong that allowed this to happen to your dad. And this is the sort of a description of how it happened and why it happened. But we don't want you to think that this is an excuse. There's no excuse. What happened to your dad is inexcusable. There's absolutely no excuse for your dad being burned in a fire in our operating room. It just should not have happened. And we deeply regret it happening, and we're so sorry that it happened. And it was our fault that it happened. So I don't want all of this explanation to sound like it might be an excuse. There isn't an excuse. All of these mistakes we made, we could have done things to stop, and we're taking steps to make sure they don't happen again. Cool comfort at this point for your dad, probably.
One of the things I want to emphasize too, and we did talk about this as well, is that we appreciate the fact that there's been no bills, because it's been disruptive enough for Jeffrey and Susan. I mean, Susan's actually had to change her employment to take care of her dad. So as we move into the compensation discussion, I just want to express that appreciation. That would have been just a horrible thing to see as bills coming in the mail. I think you handled that really well. And we're curious to know what further financial compensation you have in mind.
So we feel very strong.
I want to mention, because it has happened before. We have this process. We gave you that compensation card, to do that. It's not perfect though, and I just want to let you know you might get a bill. If you do, that's totally unintentional. You have our phone number, you have our contact, we're reaching out frequently. If you should get a bill, you need to let us know, because that is a mistake, but sometimes, Martin, mistakes do happen. I'm sorry, Bruce, I interrupted you, but I just didn't want you to think it can't happen, because things can slip through on that.
But it's a big, complicated system, and if you get a bill, just send it. We don't expect you to pay any bills. When we harm patients, we don't expect them to pay for care that harmed them or the consequences. So, unless you have more questions about the how and the why, we'd like to talk about our effort to try to compensate you for what happened, and especially for the suffering that your family has endured. Would it be all right to talk about that now?
I don't think I have any more questions.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about that now.
So without getting into the full financial details, that will be part of Martin working through that and working with you. There are going to be categories of things that you'll be entitled to. I mean, it's part of our process to do what we can to make this right and make you whole. It was actually very helpful that you mentioned you've had to change your job. That clearly is something that you've had to do because he was burned, and we're accountable for that. So part of what we'll need you to do is to work and calculate what that sort of difference is and how that factors in a way that's fair and thinks about, on an ongoing basis what that piece might be. The other part, and it's as Bruce mentioned, it's really, really hard to put a financial number on the hell you've gone through, what it's like for you to see your dad and the pain he may have gone through with all the procedures that I know, multiple procedures he had again, but that is something that I think we intend to do, Martin. I think we need to look at that, and we need to find a fair way to think about, making that as part as well. And there may be lots of other expenses. I know you travel a far way to get to the hospital. There may be hotels, there may be the travel. We need to think about all that sort of work. And so there's actually a process where I think we can go through and do all of that. And once I think we're there with something that's fair, and Martin shares that with you, that's when I think we begin to meet and talk about, what to do this. And any other thoughts, Martin, you have on that end?
Well, I'm glad to hear the acknowledgement of the fact that this is not just about your out-of-pocket costs. This is also about the change in your life and the change to your dad's life. So if you're comfortable, we can continue to come up with a figure that feels fair to you. I can work with Bruce and the hospital on that. Is there anything else that you want? from this hospital that you haven't mentioned so far? Or need?
I think just continuing the conversation.
Yeah. I mean, I think I appreciate your willingness to work with us. And yeah, I mean, I would like to know that we can reach out to you anytime with more questions or requests for information or assistance or anything like that. Yeah.
Well, and we'd be willing to, you have a big family, we know that. You guys have bared the burden of all the information and haven't pushed it out. If you thought it was helpful for us to come out somewhere in your neighborhood, meet somewhere to meet your other family members, I mean, that's your option. If you want us to come and do that, we'd be happy to go and meet with your family, explain it, because it can't be easy for you to turn around and hear all this stuff we said when we'll be willing to do that. Wherever you say, whenever you say, we can work it out, because this is really, really hard what you've gone through.
Yep.
And also, have you guys had enough conversations with Dr. Phillips and the other folks who are in the operating room? Do you feel like you're in a comfortable place with respect to that, or are you hoping still to have more resolution or conversations with the doctor?
I don't want to speak for my sister, but just kind of taking it as it comes. This is the first conversation. I feel like that needed to happen and kind of go from there. But this has been really important and I think vital in just kind of moving forward and trying to put this past us.
Go ahead, Mark.
Well, I mean, you've signed the consent form, and I wanted to make sure before I handed it over to Mr. Lambert here that you do feel like you're getting honest and complete answers to all of your questions and concerns.
I mean, I'm still mad, but yeah, I mean, we want to work with you. I don't want to make this difficult. I'm okay with that.
Susan?
Yeah.
You have every right to be
Yeah.
mad. And we accept and bear the burden of your anger. What we did to your father never should have happened. We harmed him. It was unintentional, but it was through mistakes that we made. And for that reason, you have every reason to be angry with us. And what we're hoping to do is make it right. Not by our apology, but by compensating in you, by apologizing, and by also compensating in these other ways. And you'll just have to let us know. And it may be that you'll always be angry with us because of what happened, because we can't undo the suffering that your father endured. And that's the reality of the situation.
I want to thank you also. I'm going to hand over this document for you now, but I want to also thank you for not making this worse than it had to be. I mean, I've heard other patient advocates talk about how suffering the injury that a family suffers is one thing, but then being treated disrespectfully is a whole nother harm. And I hope you feel that you've been respectfully treated. I can tell you that this is an unusual process. In my practice of law, I don't see too many hospitals that come up and just are this candid, this quickly, and this completely as this hospital's been. Usually these things drag on for years, and it seems like we are close to being able to resolve this financially soon.
So to that end, we'll wait to hear from you. Mm-hmm. Again, we will meet as quickly as possible once you have more information to share. Just know that from our perspective, the conversation isn't over until you say it's over. We're making some big commitments to you about trying to prevent this from happening again and the other pieces of it, but we're committed to the conversation and the dialogue.
And I'll just say in closing, on behalf of Tim and myself and the hospital and the surgical team, we're so sorry about what happened and about our role in hurting your dad. And we hope that you will pass along, again, our apologies to your dad and our best wishes to him. I know that in his state, I'm not certain how well he understands that, but I hope that you'll convey our sincerest apologies and regrets to him, and maybe also the contents of this conversation to the extent that he's able to understand it.
Thank you.
That's a wrap.
Okay, thanks so much.
All right.
Thank you.
See.
Thank you.
Now do I have to debrief myself?
Yes. No, we let them debrief.
I think we'll just take questions from the audience.
You guys rocked it. That was so good. I really appreciate seeing the experts go through it. You guys were awesome.
Thank you.
We want more than just praise. We want more praise, but we want more than just praise.
From Dar because she was awesome. I think you could have done this better than I did it.
I think many of you could have done this. So having seen us do it, did we do it differently than you would have? What did we do differently?
You were just so skilled at talking about the finances.
You were so skilled at talking about the finances, and that's the piece that I'm probably least comfortable with. And I presume that most of us in this room are probably least comfortable talking about the financial aspects. And so,
Because it tends to cheapen the life of the patient, or why? What makes you uncomfortable about talking about money?
the only time in my experience that we talk about money is through mediation, when we've already had a suit filed against us. And so
I can see how you'd feel that way then. 'cause
yeah, so it's kind of
mediation
like, you know, a cold sweat, like, oh,
Yeah.
good God, we're talking about money before they even filed a suit. You know, I mean, it's just not what we're accustomed to.
I mean, that's one of the beautiful things about Candor, is by the time you're ready to talk about money in a Candor situation, you've already admitted liability. You've already told the truth about what happened. So this is the inevitable next step, is that you are going to try to make them whole in a way that's fair. And granted, the nitty-gritty discussions about valuing his suffering and so on is going to happen between the attorneys. We don't normally involve a family in that much. But yeah, I think that's one of the great things about Candor, is that there isn't, by this time, there's no shame in talking about money. It's part of our restitution. I thought there was a hand up in back, or maybe you in the white shirt or in the jacket.
I was just going to say that, yeah, great job. It was really nice to see you guys walk through that, and I was able to take 3 pages of notes. But it's interesting to me that during all of what you discussed, you didn't name an amount, and I think that's why I was anxious, thinking of how in the world would you put an amount on this conversation. And when you said cheapen his life, it's kind of what I was feeling going into this. But seeing you walk through that, I feel much more at ease, because that conversation will help happen after this talk between the attorney and whoever at the facility.
Susan and Jeffrey, what do you think? I mean,
You guys need some work. There's some things, we have a lot of notes. What time does this go till? I actually got a little lost in that one, like as far as like syncing, like being in here with you. I think partly it was because we've been doing it with so many people where it's so new to them. The pace always is so fast when it's new people and you're in front of your peers, and I understand that. But to have you two, to have it slow down and to have the ability to have some of that emotion process and the breath and the space made such a difference. It was incredible, the empathy coming off of you. That's the stuff that you just can't fake. Your body language, your attention to detail. One of the biggest things that happened right away was you asked how we were, and Susan answered, and then we were about to move on, but then Tim, you stopped and you said, hey, but wait, we didn't hear from you just yet. Are you okay? Knowing that her process of grief or whatever she's going through is different than mine. So immediately I was gonna hold on to that and be like, I can't believe they didn't ask me how I was.
You're ready to be resentful.
I was ready to add that to my list. But I was able
but everybody knows Matt's my nephew in real life, right? So I really needed to know how he was doing.
It was good. So I felt taken care of, and that I felt like we did come to a figure even though we didn't. It felt good, even though I'm still mad.
And your willingness to, you guys seemed very comfortable speaking with our lawyer, which I imagine on the side of who you were portraying might be a little bit scary once the lawyers are in the room, or I don't know, but your ease with like, all right, great, well, we'll be in touch and we'll talk, kind of felt a little bit like as much as I'm sure ultimately on our side we'd be curious about what figures you come up with, it's also something we probably don't really want to deal with, especially not initially. And it felt like, okay, they're going to take care of that portion. Great. I don't have to feel gross about saying, like, how are you going to compensate us? You know what I mean? And that was really nice.
Yeah.
I think it's. Go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, at an earlier point in my legal career, I did bankruptcy work. This felt like bankruptcy, because in bankruptcy, the bad stuff has already happened. You're just trying to put together the best possible solution. And it's a lot of camaraderie amongst the people that are going, okay, something bad has happened, but now what can we fix, and how are we going to fix it in the most meaningful way?
It's just,
You had an interesting reaction when I said I was accountable as a CMO.
That really surprised me as an actor.
Me too.
I was over.
Tell me a little bit more about that, because I think it's important. This group, I think, knows it. But that is almost exactly how the conversation went when I had the conversation with the Malizo family. Is that when they asked that,
who's going to be held accountable?
and it's because I was the head of safety. I was the chief safety and risk officer for the whole university. So,
And the chair of the Moderate Sedation Committee.
and yeah, there were lots of pieces. So when you asked that, my natural feeling, you're looking at him. That's why I'm here.
It was honest, it was genuine, and it's hard enough to get people to take accountability in whatever they do for their lives, or whenever something conflict or whenever that comes up and someone needs to take accountability. But when the stakes are this high and it's a hospital and healthcare, I feel like what I've learned and what I keep hearing is not a lot of people hear people take accountability. And it was relieving. It was just a relief.
You didn't demand to have anyone fired, which we see sometimes, and and I didn't get a chance to use one of my favorite lines, which is something like, "If we thought firing someone was going to make us safer, we would consider firing someone." But we've looked at this. We just don't think that's going to make anyone safer, because we don't think that was what was at the root of the problem. We think we have a variety of other ways of making us safer, but we don't think firing anyone is going to make us safer. If we didn't change anything else and we fired the surgeon, we think the next surgeon would be just as likely to have a fire as this surgeon was.
Yeah. I saw other hands up and stuff.
Drew, Kate? Yep.
Hi, everyone. Is this on, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Kate Strickler from the Medical Society. I don't want to get into too much of the nitty-gritty stuff, but I do want to point out that I think somebody said that we're 8 months into the discussion, and I want to point out that the law says that the consent form has to be signed within 180 days. So the conversation can, of course, continue years beyond that, but the consent form, in order to use the law, has to be within the first 6 months. I also wanted to point out that because the two individuals participating in the discussion are not the patient themselves, it's a different consent form that the patient himself would sign. Not that it would make a difference in the actual discussion, but that's something for people to be aware of when they're moving forward.
Great.
Kate, does it matter if they're the legal guardians of a person who is incompetent?
The law doesn't specifically address that, but I would say no, that it would still be it's called consent by others, essentially. Anyone else.
So a parent for a child, it would be, they need that other form.
I would say so, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
No, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Yes, Iris.
Right.
Comment and a question. I thought it was really neat how you waited for a moment to introduce the Candor topic, the consent topic. You started off by apologizing and saying, we've got things we want to share with you, and that was really helpful for me, because I was really racking my brain figuring out how in the world do you even introduce, here, sign this paper and then we can talk. So that was really cool, thank you. And then my other question is, how long is the Candor coverage, so to speak, or Candor in place? When does it end? Is it?
I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
The Iowa legal people will have a better answer to that.
There is no answer to that. I mean, there is no end. It goes indefinitely. The only thing that needs to be pointed out is that it doesn't toll the statute of limitations. So after 7 years, then the family is barred from bringing a legal case, and the Candor process, no matter what, right? Okay. And so that's one of the things that has to be disclosed at the beginning, is be aware that this is a confidential conversation. You have the right to an attorney, you have the right to your medical records, And I think that that might be something too to point out to the family when you're trying to get that consent, is in addition to it protecting us, it also protects you because it requires us to remind you that you have the right to these things. And we're required to provide you with the law that says what the statute of limitations are, just to make sure that you know what your rights are and that you know what the time frame is on bringing a lawsuit.
And if a lawsuit is brought, then obviously it's the candor protection is out of the window.
No, you still.
No, it's all protected.
What was said under those protections is still protected.
Yes,
but they can
there
sue
is
you and
no-
bring up all the other facts.
Right. I guess I meant there's no more ability at that point to have the private conversations continue.
I don't know the answer to that
The
question.
conversations,
Well,
they can
it's-
still continue. I don't
Even
know
if a
how
petition is
much, right.
Okay.
The
Yeah.
physicians might not want to engage in that anymore, but they still absolutely
Right.
can, and we would of course encourage them to do
Right.
so. Even if
And
the
here we
lawsuit
could
is filed.
reflect on our experience at U of I. Once you start doing this and doing it reasonably well and telling the truth to patients and families, you get sued so rarely.
Yeah.
No one wants a lawsuit. Patients don't want lawsuits, families don't want lawsuits, and the hospital doesn't want a lawsuit. I think Tim could reflect on the specifics, but what a couple people litigated about the amount, even once you had admitted liability, did that happen?
No, one lawsuit in 8 years.
So once you start telling the truth, people just don't sue you anymore.
And in the conversation, it almost sounded as if you had already spoken with Marty about that. So had you already spoken with the family attorney about the concept of candor protection? It sounded
Yes.
like that was
Yes.
part of it. And that was another aha for
Yes.
me, that can happen ahead of this conversation.
Yeah, and the way it happens is, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's a notice to get consent that precedes the consent. That gets shared with the attorney, because it says in there you can reach out to your attorney, who would then reach out to us, and we say, yeah, we'd like to meet with the family, it'd be great if you could be there, and during that process, we're going to try to pursue the consent. So yeah, and that's why the notice is really good that they would have signed before. We didn't get into here because we didn't have the time. But that is super helpful because it sets up the next conversation.
And we, at the Medical Society too, we genuinely want the attorneys to be involved. I think it's good for patients to feel that they have an advocate on their side. I mean, it's good for all parties involved. So it's not just a formality like, hey, you have the right to have an attorney. Everyone involved wants you to get an attorney. So with our pilot program that Dr. McCoy talked about last time, he has worked with attorneys to figure out how this process works before they even have a client who might be in that position, just to make sure that they're willing to take these cases, that they're not unfamiliar with these cases, to really provide good representation to those patients.
I want a couple points. First of all, Tim, it's almost 3:40. I know we were hoping to wrap relatively soon.
So couple more.
If there's a couple more questions. And then, in Candor, it's just a much less adversarial process, because if the hospital has made a mistake in a Candor situation, you have admitted it. So the issue of proving liability and being adversarial about whether it was your fault is sort of off the table because you've admitted it. If the hospital doesn't think they've made a mistake, I suppose it's a little dicier because patients can get harmed without any negligence
this
having
conversation
occurred.
is we're glad you'd met, and here's what it is, and we would have just said it was totally appropriate for him to use 10 times the alcohol prep solution. But I mean, no, really, in a lot of cases, in the study out of Massachusetts, 90% of those conversations are, the hard part is going to be, here is, our care was okay. And your lawyer's here, and we want to explain it to him, and here's the chart, and here's all the information, but we believe our care was okay. That's 90% of these conversations.
I'd like to actually make a couple comments, and there's somebody else who wants to get into this conversation. But Iris, also, one of the things that's interesting about Iowa for us, because you have this law, is just to see how legal behavior changes when the lawyers in a community who are used to having to fight about this realize that there's another way in which they can serve their clients well. And then the other thing I want to mention is, people come out of hospitals and they whisper, they talk to their neighbors. And the Blazos, I think, are a really good example of that. They went home to Indiana after getting a Candor process at Illinois, and they told their friends, this is the hospital that tells you the truth. And Barb Blazo, who you haven't met, but will, hopefully sometime, said people didn't believe us. They said hospitals don't do that. So once you start taking the leap of faith, I'm going to use that language because it came out of the last workshop, you're going to see your community responding as well, lawyers, and just the scuttlebutt, the church conversations, the card party conversations. It's going to change, especially in a community like yours.
Was there a question on this side of the room, I thought?
Yeah. I've got one as well. Go ahead.
Well, go ahead.
He's got it. You got the chat box. Go ahead.
So this is going to reek of a guy who missed the first 3 sessions and shows up today. So I hope I'm not offending anyone when I ask it, but
Tell us who you are.
I'm Mark Wills. I work at Skiff Medical Center, service excellence, performance excellence role. The question that I have is, the entire day I feel like we're building up to this crescendo of this discussion right here. And it is initiated beautifully. And we articulate where we're going with this. And then I think it's Jeffrey. We introduced and he says, sounds like you're covering your ass. Yeah. I'm not going to sign it. At that point, because everything we do, right, we want to know what we want. We'll begin with the end in mind. We want to know the outcome. If he had said no, how do I, because these people have suffered greatly, how do I articulately, because I'm going to be disappointed if we got to that point. We've done all this work, we have a pre-meeting. He says no. How do I gracefully articulate and navigate our path from that point on?
So,
you go ahead, Tim.
Well, I mean, so you acknowledge, you want to find out if you can answer anything going on in his head that's making him say no. If you exhaust that, then the way you do it is say that's, really unfortunate. You know how the process is here. That's how it is. But I still want this conversation to continue. But unfortunately, there are just going to be certain things without this consent that we're not going to be able to share. And part of it is our event review. I can't do that. I'm prohibited from doing that. And boy, I'd like to share that with you. But I'm still willing to follow up with you. I want to see how you're doing. I care how you're doing. I want to know if there's anything else you need. And that's I think is the best response. You want to love them through it.
Yeah. We're still even willing to make a settlement. Yes, Tim?
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing that I would say was I was reading a great book about negotiations by a guy named Chris Voss. It's called Never Split the Difference. I really highly recommend it. It's really about empathy and negotiation. And one of the things he says in that book is that no is the beginning of a negotiation.
Yep.
It's not the end. So he says there's a famous negotiation book which he rips apart in this book called Getting to Yes. And he really thinks of negotiation as getting to no. He says as soon as you get a no, that's when the negotiation really begins.
Yep. To find out why the no.
Exactly. So you shouldn't be afraid of a no. A no is just an opportunity to continue to be empathic. Had he said no, I would have just kept exploring. Why no?
Yep.
Thank you.
I agree, Bruce. We've never done this before, but it feels like we might have.
Tim spoke up and answered in response to Jeffrey's question and basically said, I'm responsible. I'm the organization. I'm responsible. Did that help you see how this could be done in your organization?
Oh, absolutely. And I have to get over myself because this discussion isn't about me, but I would have been so disappointed if they weren't willing to go all the way at that point because I'm so invested in it.
Yep.
That's why I prompted them to say, I kept trying to check in with them and say, is there other stuff that you need to know? I mean, what is the source of your distrust? I mean, the anger I just acknowledged, that was going to be there, but what is the source? What haven't you heard that you need to hear? So.
But what's your first name?
Mark.
Mark, so some of what you're feeling, Mark, you could use in the discussion. You could say, I'm so disappointed to hear you say no. I'm so eager to share with you everything that we've learned. Is there any way we can make you feel comfortable enough to sign? You know what I mean?
Or maybe you just need time.
Yeah.
And so, let's answer any of the questions I can answer for you. And then if you're okay, we'll reach out again. You may not want to meet with us. We'll see what happens. Your lawyer may not, but we want to keep the conversation going.
So here in the white coat, go ahead.
I felt like one of the things that you did say that you said multiple times that really impressed me, and I wrote it down, to help make you whole in your healing. Yeah. That was just, I saw you guys tear up over that. I think the first time that he said that, or your eyes kind of popped. That really felt sincere to me, and I think it must have made a difference.
We walk a fine line with that because we always want to acknowledge that we can't ever make you whole.
We want to try, though.
And yet we want to come as close as is possible with money and other gestures that we're able to make. But we know we can't unharm your dad, like those burns and the trauma and stuff like that.
Susan?
Yeah.
Yeah, did I see you have your hand up?
Oh, no, I was scratching my head.
Oh, okay. I had my peripheral vision going there, Matt. Did you? Yeah.
And it is in those moments of genuine, like the genuine offer, rather than just going through the motions of it and not jumping ahead, because I felt like Tim and Bruce were with us. Like they weren't thinking about down the line of where it needed to go. They were very genuinely asking the questions and not thinking, hey, how are you? We got to get to that money part. like I didn't see that in their body and in their eyes. So I think it's that genuine meaning of inhabiting what it is to say those phrases to people, to really mean it.
But it's hard. I was impatient. I wanted to get to the money thing. There was another
You see,
point.
I hit him a couple times, though. Did you guys see that?
There was another point where I was uncomfortable. I think I can't remember, but there was a point where I was like actively having to suppress like what I was feeling in order to try to do the right thing.
There was one thing that I did hear you say, Bruce, and I think this is what you're talking about. You did say, we want to make it right.
Yeah.
And I just wondered, is that something we really would want to say? I think you were a little frustrated with his anger at that point. And maybe that's why that came out. And I just, not that I'm criticizing because I thought you did a great job, but I was just curious.
I was struggling. I think I was looking for the word restitution and I couldn't think of it. And maybe that's too big a word anyway. But I was trying to find a way to say, we've harmed you and we want to do what we can to make that right. I still feel relatively comfortable with that expression. Did that put you guys off at all, the idea to make it right?
No, because I think that this was about you actually trying to make it right. Not fix. Fix would have been a different thing, but to make right.
And the other thing that I could have emphasized maybe more and said explicitly was, we're not looking for absolution. We don't want your forgiveness, and we don't think that we really deserve your forgiveness. We have done something wrong to hurt your family.
That's inexcusable.
Yeah, and so we don't feel like we've earned or deserved forgiveness or absolution. We're just trying, given the constraints of what's already happened, we're trying to do what's best. And I think the beauty of candor is that we've told the truth, so we don't have to hide anything. We've admitted liability, so we don't have to dance around that. We really are in a position of trying to make restitution. Now, there's another element. We are not going to give them billions of dollars because their dad was burned in the OR. We're not even going to give them tens of millions of dollars. There is going to be a finite amount of money that they're going to get. And there is a crass kind of expertise that lawyers have in valuing people's suffering. It's incredibly crass to think about, but it exists. In any given jurisdiction, experienced lawyers know what these kinds of injuries are worth. When I first was exposed to that, when I got into this, I was shocked and offended at the idea that people would specialize in quantifying people's suffering. But you have to, and it's actually not that complicated. So lawyers from the hospital and Marty would be able to get together, and without that much deliberation, arrive at a number which was, in this jurisdiction, the amount that injury was, quote, worth.
Or what's fair. It's more what's fair than is a better way to approach it than what's worth. What's fair when you're resolving early and you're doing all that versus...
You've all seen contracts, whether it's real estate or whatever, where you can see a contract and go, okay, this is a group that's aiming for fairness versus this is a group that's protecting themselves, and now we have to protect ourselves by being equally aggressive back. But it's time, right? Because we also have some final remarks by...
So can we give Andy and Marika and Marty and Tim and myself a big round of applause?
I always swore we would never do this, Bruce. I know. And you know that. I know. But we always said, what are we going to do?
We'll see from the evaluations whether they thought it was worthwhile or not. So do we want to let any of the Iowa Medical Society people or Iowa Hospital Association, or are we going to make our final comments or just going to say farewell?
We're gonna flip it over. Although, actually, before we go very quickly, who's got the box? I just want to really quickly. So what I want to do, I want to start with Clay over here. Real quick, go around. One person from each table. Just really quickly share. Michelle will write it down. Any big time lesson learned, aha moment, or something else, a quick phrase. We'll go all the way around and then we'll flip it to you.
I guess for me, it was just inspiration to even learn and start this process at our hospital.
Awesome. Great. How about
just one per table.
Just one person per table. We're just going to flip it around really quickly.
I guess for me, the trust on behalf of, in this particular case, in the facility or the hospital and the staff, that they trusted that they could be that candid with the individuals. And it was evidence to me through handing that consent over. In our world of healthcare, when we give someone a consent, we want their signature and we want the paper back. And you didn't take the paper back, you left it with them, which I thought was a huge show of trust.
Great. Thank you. Who here?
Okay, at most meetings, I usually make my grocery list or my to-do list.
How long's your grocery list?
I haven't. I don't have anything on my list other than who I can entice, involve, engage back at home. You know, who are the ones I would like to approach, and then maybe out of that, more people would volunteer, and how can we take this to our small hospitals?
So, who internally at your hospital do you need to talk to? It's a leadership issue. It's got to be the CEO.
No, but who can have these conversations also? I mean, yes, we know leadership needs to be involved,
Right.
but who
would
other
come and have the conversations?
What physicians would be great at this? Well, you know, who
You're
would
thinking
we
of who would be on your communication consult
Yeah, our
service,
go-team.
sort of.
Yeah.
Our go-to.
I think you've got to go to your leaders in the physician area and find that out and have that conversation. That's what I do. And
I
if
have
you
my
want me or
list.
Bruce to come and talk to them,
Absolutely.
we do that all the time. I just was in Tahoe Forest and met with a big group of physicians, and we were able to identify a whole ton of people going in. Who here would like to offer a lesson learned?
Just throw up the square and see who catches it.
Yeah.
I didn't catch it. I just have been inspired through this whole workshop. We don't have just culture. I've said this before. We don't have just culture at our facility, our organization. But I'm going to start the conversations with leaderships, and I already have. We just need to get it going.
Great. Thank you. How about over here?
I'm just sorry that I wasn't able to attend the first three. This has been incredible, and I took a lot of notes as well, and I've just got a lot of things going on in my head on how we could push this out and really make it something that's statewide.
Great. Thank you. Let us know if you need a hand.
One of the quotes today, bad and traumatic things are going to happen. Now we have tools to deal with them.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. We'll flip it over.
All right.
Last word.
So let's hear it again for Tim and Marty and Bruce and the team from MedStar.
And Carol. And Carol, unfortunately,
yes,
who had to leave to catch a plane to get back to Colorado.
Absolutely. So for those of you that don't know me, my name's Dennis Tibbin. I'm the Director of Government Affairs for the Iowa Medical Society. The Medical Society has been, as we've said throughout this series, engaged with the Candor process since 2013. And I can't tell you guys how excited we are to have so many folks from so many different facilities that are learning these skills and are getting excited to take this back to their local communities. So just a few pieces of information. On all of your tables, we did include Kate's card. Encourage you to take one of those back with you. As you can see, the legal component of this is quite nuanced. Kate has been helping our pilot site go through this process for the last 2 years. We have those sample forms that we've circulated at past workshops. We have that technical assistance. We want to come out and help you all get the policies and procedures put in place so that you're not unnecessarily exposing yourself to additional liability. That statute is in place for a reason, and we want to help you use it. To that end, we will be reaching out to each of you individually, having a conversation about how your experiences through this workshop have gone, what additional resources and expertise we can help connect you with as you go through this. And to the individual that missed the first couple of workshops, and I know several of you have made it to some and not all. I know Dar has been a perfect pupil at all 4 of them. Thank you. The recordings from all 4 of these workshops are going to be released here in a few weeks. Our friends from CLE Productions are going to put the polishes on this last workshop, and we'll be pushing that out to everyone that's registered as well. So keep an eye out for that. It'll be available on the websites. We have it on the IMS website. We have it on the HIN website as well as all of those sample forms, copies of the statute, a number of different educational resources. So I encourage you to take a look at those, and certainly grab any of us afterwards. We're happy to be a resource. So thank you all again, and have a safe travels home.
Fill out your action forms, on there as well. Those are going to be super helpful
fill
for
out your
us.
evaluations. We
Yep.
take careful. We pay careful attention to those. Thanks, Iowa, for your hospitality, for your kindness, for your time and your consideration. We really appreciate it.